would let folks know that we are looking at potentially some legislative priorities rubber meeting the road in the next few days here. So we do have HF 1463 is going to get a hearing tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the House. You can look up the schedule at the state legislature. I'll be testifying myself, but this one is an additional 25 million for town roads and 10 for town bridges. Thank you to Representative Allen for that. But we've got a list of folks signing on to it. So we've got Nelson, Lawrence, Duran, Hudson, Altendorf, Jacob, Meekland, Lipinski, Sexton, Davis, Novotny, and Knudsen. So if folks on this call are so inclined, please do give your representative a call. Please send them a letter, let them know that this thing is important to you and that this would really potentially help you and your citizens out here. So that is town roads. Now this afternoon, I will be meeting with Representative Gordon, who has got an annexation bill that we're trying to get heard. So once again, that one was, we're hoping that we were going to get a hearing this week. It looks like it might have gotten kicked. We're hearing now, but in any event, please do consider reaching out to your legislator, talking to them about annexation and transportation funding. This really does help us out. This really does sort of get stuff unstuck. People being willing to do this is why we're getting hearing on transportation funding bill this year when we didn't last year. Okay. Now, I thought, yes, nice little reminder from Leslie in the comments there. No Township Tuesday during the next 2 times because, of course, we'll be doing spring short courses. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody out there. So yeah, please do come see us. The more the merrier. And we do think we've got a lovely program this year. There's more details available on our website if you are curious. Now, okay. Speed limits. So this is a one that we get relatively frequently at the association, and it's one of the worst written statutes in the state of Minnesota, and that is saying something. But what sort of power do we have with respect to these things? So the answer is that a lot of it comes from Minnesota Statute 169.14, and in particular, the first 3 subdivisions. And this is a classic case of judicial hokey pokey or legislative hokey pokey. The basic rule is no person shall drive a vehicle at a speed greater than is reasonable and prudent under the conditions. Now, has anybody ever seen a sign saying speed limit is no greater than is reasonable and prudent under the conditions? Yeah. In practice, that is not the actual rule. The exceptions have mushroomed to the point where they really kind of take over the actual rule. But here is the common list. So in an urban district, 30 miles an hour, 65 in non-interstate expressways, 70 miles per hour on an interstate highway in outside the limits of urbanized areas, 65 inside, 10 in alleys, 25 in residential roadways, and 35 in rural residential districts. So this is where a lot of that stuff comes from. And one thing that I'd like to highlight there is the real default, which is the 3rd item on this list from subdivision 2 there. 55 miles per hour in locations other than those specified in this section. So that's the one that's going to govern most of the time on most of our township rules. The real default rule is 55 miles per hour. Now, there are ways out of that default rule. So as we were talking, we're going to talk a little bit about this one in particular later, but there are some hidden ones. So school zones, that's not in that conventional list. Obviously, it requires a school. I need a DOT speed study, but you're more likely to get one in those particular cases. And it also only is in effect when children are present. Work zones, again, not in that classic list, but it is there. This is one that we have the authority to do by ourselves. We don't need permission from MnDOT. And so that's kind of a nice little thing. For most of our roads, we're going to be able to knock it down to 20 just by passing resolution and by putting up signs. during the course of that workday. If you are dealing with an area that is less than 50 miles an hour, you can even limit it to 15 if you like. But we don't need MnDOT's permission from that one. There's another weird hidden one. This one is in Chapter 327. If you're dealing with a manufactured home park or a recreational camping area, you also get to just set the speed limit. You don't need MnDOT's permission for that one, and that one is 10 miles an hour. But for everything else, if you don't have any special, and we'll come back to the rural residential district thing, but for everything else, you're pretty much going to need a speed study. So the way this works, if the town board is believes that a particular area is not either the speed limit is too low or too high, you can request a study from the Department of Transportation. These are usually made by resolution. They're done in the summer, but be careful about this. Just because you think the speed limit should be one way doesn't necessarily bind the DOT. It's not that unusual, for example, for folks to want the speed limit to be lower, DOT to come in and say, no, actually, 60 is fine in this area. And we are stuck with their answer. On top of which, quite frankly, they're not that responsive to townships in our experience. I mean, obviously, they're covering the whole state of Minnesota, so, it's worth remembering that. But this is a tool to be careful with for that reason. Now, as a practical matter, this is the one that I think really helps us as townships, rural residential districts. So back on slide number 4 here, 35 miles an hour in a rural residential district if adopted by the road authority. So we are the road authority for our cases, and rural residential districts are a special kind of definition here. So a rural residential district means the territory contiguous to and including any city street or town road that is built up with visible dwelling houses situated at intervals averaging 300 feet or less for a distance of a quarter mile or more. So if you have all of those conditions, so it's built up, it's got to have visible dwelling houses, intervals of less than 300 feet, and it has to have enough of them to fill up a quarter mile, then we get to knock the speed limit down to 35 on our own power. However, even in these cases, that is not effective unless the road authority has erected signs designating the speed limit and indicating the beginning and ending of the rural residential district for the roadway on which the speed limit applies. So really, the bottom line here is that MnDOT has most of the authority in this area. You do have some options potentially if this is a problem in your community, but these are relatively tightly defined. And the ones that are sort of outside of those definitions tend to carry a bit more risk than you would think, frankly. So, okay. Relatively straightforward one today. Thought we'd go relatively quickly just because we're coming up on Town Tuesday, and of course we're busy at the legislature, so I didn't want to spend too much of that. How do you get a statute changed? Well, it's a pain. So we are working, particularly in this area. One of the things we're working on is sort of filling. There are a lot of ways. The classic way is you get somebody in the Senate and somebody in the House to propose a bill that amends it. Once that you get majority vote there, presented to the governor, signed, becomes a law. Same for us. Any statute can be amended by the same process that it was adopted. Now, there are sometimes little workarounds. One of the little workarounds that we're working on in this particular area is there's this safe school zone or safe road zone designation that exists in Chapter 169, which currently doesn't have much in the way of meaning. So local governments can designate these potential areas safe road zones, and we are hoping to potentially get recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Panel, allowing us to use that as a sort of backdoor mechanism to control speed limits in our townships. So sometimes you can have these nice little administrative kind of, when the legislature has designated certain authorities to certain bodies, you can kind of get them to exercise their statutory authority, and you can kind of change it around that way. The other potential option is impact litigation. Like, you think you got a good argument about the interpretation of a particular statute, you think it might be unconstitutional for some reason, something like that, you can potentially functionally change the law through impact litigation. But each of these is potentially difficult and time consuming. So can you define ATV speed limits on township or county roads? So let's hop over to that statute here. Because it is usually good to answer questions with this thing in mind. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. So this thing is written to be agnostic about the kind of thing you're driving here. The following speed limits shall be lawful, but any speed in excess of such limits shall be prima facie evidence that the speed is not reasonable or prudent and that it is unlawful. So, it's not saying that the speed limit only applies to cars or trucks or whatever contraption you like. I would take the view that if you've got an ATV that's capable of moving faster than say 35 miles an hour in that rural residential district, and that ATV can violate the speed limit. Now, whether or not those things are street legal, it's another issue. We do have some authority over that. That's not something that I know well enough off the top of my head to really opine on, but at least as a matter of strict statutory interpretation, I would take the view that this would apply to those two. What if we've already got 25 on our roads without MnDOT, and when the roads might not meet resident definition for residential roads? So there is a grandfather clause in this thing. So those things were changed a couple of years back when the older limits can remain in place until the end of the life cycle for those signs, is my recollection on that point. If you want a more detailed answer, shoot me an email and we'll talk about it. But in theory, somebody who gets a speeding ticket on one of these roads, which is not consistent with these definitions, could potentially challenge it and could potentially win. Now, is it going to be worth it for your average motorist to pay an attorney to argue in court that hey, look, you didn't have the authority to lay out this speed limit? Probably not. Most people are probably just going to take the ticket and pay it. And most people who are even inclined to fight it are probably not going to think of the interpretation issue. But yeah, there is that potential vulnerability if we're not acting consistently with this thing. There's another item about residential roads in 25 miles an hour. Does that one apply to us? Yes, it does, or at least it can in theory. So here, let me go ahead and show you where that one comes from. So we'll just flip over to our go ahead and flip over to our definitions section there. Just a moment. So just so that we're all on the same page. There we go. Let's go ahead and share our screen here. Okay. So we've got item number 7 here, and like item number 8, this one, the road authority has to erect signs on this one. We are road authorities; we can use it when it applies to us. But yes, 25 miles an hour in residential roadways, if adopted by the road authority having jurisdiction over the residential roadway. So they define these things, they sort of hide the meat of the statute in a different place. It's 169.011. Residential roadway means a city street or town road that is less than 1/2 mile in total length, an area zoned exclusively for housing that is not a collector or arterial street. So in my experience, that one's less available for most town roads, but if you've got a road that meets that definition, then yes, you can use that. It does that power does apply to us too. So great question. Thank you for that question. Can you put non-speed limit signs like slow down, kids at play, etc.? Yes, you have the authority to do that. Now, those, do they have any legal effect? Probably not really. But you do have the so there's some, theoretically we're supposed to be using these things. We're supposed to be putting up signs in accordance with the Uniform Manual on Traffic Control Devices. So if you can find something of that nature in there, then yeah. Counties vary for ATV speeds. Certainly possible. ATVs are not. I can look up that answer. I don't have that one off the top of my head. Sorry. Speeding ticket. You think the county sheriff ever comes out here? Yes, that is a very important point. None of this matters unless you've got buy-in from local law enforcement as a way to actually enforce these limitations. Now, if you're having difficulty with local law enforcement, sheriff is an elective office, so if they're not using their resources properly, that's something that you can consider. However, it's also possible for townships to stand up their own police departments or to create departments through the use of joint powers entities. So if you're really having trouble, you do have some options here. Now that stuff is pretty expensive and potentially difficult to do, but it's an option that's potentially available if that's something you're particularly worried about. But yeah, laws on paper are one thing. They don't really exist until people start enforcement. So anytime that you're dealing with something in this area, getting buy-in from partners in the actual enforcement side of things is pretty important. So, those relationships with the county attorney's office or sort of the local guy who's willing to do contract prosecution work for you, relationship with the sheriff's office or other neighboring cities who are willing to extend some coverage, at least partially by contract or through other means. It's the administrative piece of that is real and serious, and I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. Someone wins the election on the 11th. When do they actually take office? All right. Let's see. My hands on that one. So we have, there's a weird little divide in the statute for March elections and November elections, and I'll show it to you here. Haven't the faintest idea why they decided to do this, but for November elections, we have an answer that I really quite like, which is this. I'll be elected for terms of 4 years commencing on the first Monday in January and until their successors are elected or qualified. So we've got first Monday of January. Nice, clean, clear answer. For everybody else, it is for a term of 3 years and shall serve until the successor is elected and qualified. So that's kind of the underlying language there. They don't give us an actual nice date like first Monday in January, though. That would be, I believe, the conventional answer. So once the successor is elected and qualified, then that's when the other term ends. So it depends on it's a few days, within a few days after that election. So you have to let the process run. You have to let the challenge time run. You have to give the person the affidavit of or the certification of election. then they would have to sign their oath of office and subscribe to it within the time allotted. But once that process is done, whenever it's done, then their term, and that's when their term starts. Lori is giving us the numbers on that one. Thank you, Lori. Uh, all right. The 7-day waiting period for the Board of Canvass, and then the certificate of election can be issued 10 days to take the oath, and then can take office. In practice, yes, cities do have more authority to set these things than townships, but that's because of sort of just the nature of the physical facts of city life. You know, almost everywhere in a city is going to be an urban district, so it's meeting that, like, we have a certain number of buildings for a certain stretch, right? um, so the rural residential is just it's a little bit more of a stretch for us than it is for other folks. So as a practical matter, they do have more authority over this because more of the jurisdiction that they are in control over fits into one of these categories that says they get to just do it. It depends. So they are elected and qualified once they've completed the whole process. So once your board of canvass is done and you get the certificate of election is issued, if they take the oath of office the next day, then they are elected and qualified, right? So it's not like a specific date. There's a window of time in which this can occur, which is kind of annoying. And I wish that they'd just give us an actual date for March folks like they did for November folks. But that's the legislature. So okay. Well, folks, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Please do sing out if you've got another question here. But if I don't see any, I will go ahead and say thank you. Look forward to seeing you at Spring Short Courses. Please do remember to reach out to your legislators on town road funding and annexation. And have a nice morning.